The DAC amp market is never going to stop producing products year after year. In the vast catalog of options available from Topping, SMSL, Xduo, hifi, Burson, and many nameless Chinese brands, you have got lots of options. Last year, Fiio released the K9 Pro ESS. According to some personalities, this product is groundbreaking and amazing. Appos let me borrow the K9 Pro ESS. Appos is among a few hi-fi retailers that has a wide selection of gear, not just hi-fi. Appos has good customer service and competitive prices. Check out Appos if you're interested in new or used gear. The K9 costs $850. Let's see what it has to offer. Fiio uses a lot of snazzy visuals and hyperbolic commentary in their marketing for the K9. They say that the K9, quote, moves your human core, and not just by a little. To support this argument, Fiio says they use dual ES9038 Pro DACs, a THX amp section, true balanced architecture, a linear power supply, and plentiful connection options. The 9038 Pro is not new. We've already seen it implemented into the SU9N and the D90SE and others. Fiio says that the K9 provides pure, clean sound, satisfying, even demanding listeners. They proclaim that this is due to the THX tech. The K9, as you would expect, supports all forms of music formats. PCM, DSD, MQA, and Bluetooth streaming are all included within this enclosure. Bluetooth reception goes up to LDAC and even supports Apple's AAC. Unfortunately, Fiio does not provide Bluetooth transmission. Ultimately, it would be hard for someone to read all this marketing and walk away without some strong feelings. All of this stuff is, to be perfectly honest, bold hyperbole. But if you look at the diagrams and measurements, it would be foolish also to deny that Fiio has tried to pack modern tech into their flagship product. The K9 is a chunky, big device. It's also very heavy. If you hold it in your hands, it will give you a striking impression through its weight alone. But the design is also somewhat simple, muted, and unassuming. The front panel houses 4 toggle switches. These control power, input, gain, and output. There are 4 LEDs that correspond to the connection you have selected. A large metal knob is dead center with glowing LED backlight. It has a smooth rotation. For headphone connection, Fiio gives you 1/4 inch, 4.4mm, and XLR. Strangely, the XLR jack is covered. I have no idea why this exists other than for you to lose it. It does not seem to add anything worthwhile into the design and features. On one of the sides, the K9 Pro has one USB-C input. You can use this with your mobile device. The back panel houses line in and out, 4.4mm in, XLR out, USB, Bluetooth, coaxial, and optical connections. The primary power switch is also on the back. Fiio includes a stand, and they are oddly proud of it. They say that the stand is, quote, refreshingly modern. I do not think so. It's made of light plastic and has rubber feet. Using the stand will put the K9 at a slight vertical angle. You do not have to use the stand and can put the K9 vertically anyway, but then you will block half of the vents. Overall, I am truly unimpressed with Fiio's marketing. I have repeatedly said that Fiio's marketing is very similar to the type used by Astral and Kern. It is slick and visually appealing, and full of odd pronouncements of perfection. On the other hand, the K9 is built like a tank. It is imposing. It has many connections you might want. If you have watched my other amp deck reviews, then you have a familiarity with my methodology. You can skip to the results if that's the case. If you're not familiar, then let's break down what I did here. I am not interested in emotional mumbo-jumbo. I will not cloud your judgment by talking about how dynamic a DAC or amp is, particularly since audiophile reviewers constantly misuse that term. Instead, my only goal is to figure out how the K9 performs and how it compares. With respect to overall performance, I used the K9 for about 1 month. It was one of 3 go-to amps during that period plugged into my Windows 11 PC. I was looking for any odd behavior from the Fiio driver, mechanical or electrical faults that reveal themselves during daily use, and overall ease of use. I use the K9 as a standalone DAC amp and as an amp connected to third-party DACs. Respecting comparisons, I conducted my typical A/B test using passive switches. I used both RCA and XLR switches to test single-ended and balanced performance. I did head-to-head tests on the DAC section. I compared the K9 against the Songcause LAQ-XD1, SMSL SU9N, JDS Labs Element 1st Gen, and the Topping EX5. I used the Gustard H16 as my testing amp. The H16 has both balanced and single-ended input that can be selected on the fly. I plugged each DAC section into one of the relevant passive switches. I then output from the switches to the Gustard. For the amp section test, I compared the K9 against the EX5, Gustard H16, and Rupert Neve headphone amplifier. I used the K9's DAC as the source and connected to one of the competitor amps. I switched back and forth on the K9. And to verify results, I repeated these tests, but this time using the LAQ-XD1 as the source. Next, I compared the K9 as a standalone amp DAC against the Topping EX5, Matrix Audio Mini-I Pro 3, and Fiio K5 Pro. I plugged two DACs at a time into my Windows PC and used Voicemeeter Banana to send signal to both DAC sections at once. I then plugged the single-ended output of each product into a passive A/B switch and then used various headphones to listen. Speaking of which, I used my test playlist on Amazon Music HD for all of these tests. I also implemented a random selection from my FLAC library. I listened with several headphones. This includes the audeze 4X, Avantone Planar, Austrian Audio Hi X55, and the HD6XX. Finally, I tested the power output performance. I plugged various headphones into the K9. This includes the list I already mentioned, plus the Modhouse Argon and the Beyerdynamic T1. The following section is a summary of my findings from all of these tests. Hopefully you had a chance to listen to the previous section about my testing parameters. Here, we are getting right into the results. First, let's talk about the overall experience using the K9. I had no trouble connecting the K9 to Windows, Mac, Android, or iOS. I did not need to download drivers, and Windows recognized the K9. Fiio says that the K9 can be upgraded through USB, but I did not find any firmware updates on Fiio's website. The K9 is a plug-and-play device. I cannot imagine anyone having difficulty with this, and frankly, you shouldn't. If a DAC has issues connecting, then that is an outlier. The K9 does get warm with extended use. Using it in horizontal mode requires you to give it sufficient space to dissipate heat, but using it vertically also has the same issue. However, the K9 never got hotter than my Burson 3XR. I had no difficulty using the K9 with Amazon Music, Foobar, Audirvana, or any other program. In short, the K9's performance overall was smooth and unassuming. And let's be honest, I did not have any euphoric experience using my gear with the K9. Once I plugged my headphones into the device, I was fully immersed in what I was actually doing, whether it was writing scripts, doing research, playing games, or watching videos. And, of course, while testing for this video. Let's move on to the second round of tests. This was comparisons of DAC section. Go back to the previous section if you want to hear my setup. Compared back to back, using passive A/B switches, playing the same tracks, using various headphones to verify results, my conclusion is that the K9 is a transparent, neutral-sounding DAC. And it sounds no different from the competition. The LAQ-XD1, EX5, SU9N, and JDS Labs Element had identical sound. Switching back and forth, I never heard any perceptible difference in presentation. When I compared balanced and single-ended output, the result was exactly the same. As I've said many times, balanced output does not change the sound at all. It only provides higher power output and lower measured THD. Most of the time. Sometimes, not. For all intents and purposes, the K9's DAC section is impossible to distinguish from the competition here. I seriously doubt anybody doing a true blind test would be able to tell if these DACs were being switched back and forth at all. Now, on to the third set of tests. This was in regards to the amp section of the K9. Again, go back for setup information. Once again, the K9's amp section was no different from the competition. The H16, RNHP, and EX5 had equally good performance among each other, and just as importantly, they all sounded exactly like the K9 when compared in an AB environment. Now, we should stop here for a second and underscore something very important. In both the DAC and amp testing, you need to make sure that you volume match, or as close as possible to volume match. DACs have different voltages, and you should be cognizant of that when comparing. You can mitigate different voltage outputs on DACs through Voicemeeter's independent gain section. Similarly, when comparing amps, make sure one is not louder than another. Sometimes fine-tuning can be difficult, but do the best you can. In my tests, I did have to adjust volume to make sure all competitors sounded like they had similar volume output. When mismatched, one or another sounded clearer or had more bass and yada yada, but that's just the brain picking up sounds that are louder on one device versus one that is quieter. If you do these types of tests yourself and you think you hear a difference, try to go through the steps to volume match. You'd be surprised how often a slight difference in perceived loudness can psychologically affect your impression of sound. Alright, let's move on. For the fourth test, I compared the K9 as a standalone DAC amp and used it against the EX5, Matrix Audio Mini I Pro 3, and Fiio K5 Pro. Go back again for details on how I set this up. And once again, no audible differences whatsoever. Volume matching to the best of my abilities, playing the same tracks, going back and forth on the passive switch, and using different headphones for verification, the results were consistent. The K9 sound signature as a standalone DAC amp is indistinguishable from the EX5, Mini I Pro 3, and K5 Pro. Finally, I will make some comments about the power output of the K9. Fiio claims 2 watts at 16 ohms, which is a ridiculous amount of power that nobody needs. I could not find third-party measurements to verify the numbers Fiio claims. Generally speaking, the K9 provides plenty of power for every headphone I have. This includes the 600 ohm T1 and the notoriously demanding Modhouse Argon. One oddity was with the Head Audio Headphone Revision 2. I had to put the K9 on high gain for sufficient loudness. I have no idea why the K9 struggled so much with this headphone, particularly since the headphone isn't any more demanding than other planars. I know some people have expressed concerns about the K9's power output, but frankly, I think it can drive your headphones perfectly well. Overall, through all my tests and comparisons, having used the K9 for over 1 month, I have some clear conclusions. First, the K9 Pro is an easy plug-and-play device. It is simple to use with plenty of connections. Second, it has a transparent, clean, clear sound. I never encountered any audible jitter or noise or distortion, nothing that might indicate mechanical or electrical fault. Third, the K9 sounds indistinguishable from the gear I compared against. Some of this stuff is considerably cheaper than the K9, while some is a little bit more expensive. And finally, the K9 Pro appears to have plenty of power for any headphone. Let's briefly discuss the K9 Pro's Bluetooth connection, its clocks, and the THX tech. I had no issues connecting to the K9 for Bluetooth reception. It's a simple process like any other device. I'm glad there's support for the full spectrum of codecs, including LDAC, and I never encountered any Bluetooth signal issues that have not been discussed before. Bluetooth on the K9 is as limited in sound quality and strength as anywhere else. Bluetooth remains as lossy here as with any other device. It is prone to lag and dropped connection when distance and obstacles are introduced into the environment. In short, Bluetooth on the K9 is as good and bad as on any other device that has Bluetooth. Now, let's talk a little bit about the K9's femtosecond clocks and THX. These are pointless, useless marketing mumbo-jumbo. Shoehorning dual femtosecond clocks has no effect on your experience. This is verified when comparing the K9 against any other DAC that does not have this stuff. Now, that's not to say that you won't encounter lag or jitter or drop connection on a DAC. That happens, and it has happened to me this year. But that is not related to DAC clocks. I'll explain what happened to me. Earlier this year, some of my DACs had difficulty maintaining a stable connection on Windows. I heard considerable latency playing audio. I reinstalled drivers, swapped USB ports, and disabled Windows security features. I also changed USB cables, but nothing helped. Then I downloaded Latency Mon, which is a free software that shows you your audio streams. Latency Mon identifies latency issues, obviously, and identifies what is causing them. Lo and behold, Latency Mon showed that several DLL files had been corrupted. Finding DLL files is not easy, and I eventually had to do a clean reinstall of Windows. Since then, I have not encountered anything remotely like latency on any of my DACs. The point I'm trying to make is that, yes, sometimes you will find issues like what I experienced, and in those situations, a DAC's clock will have no effect. It's Windows and its dark forest of DLL files that are trying to murder your computer. Then there's the THX Tech. I compared THX and non-THX amps at least 3 years ago. There's no audible difference in distortion, noise, hiss, or whatever. These things might make a measured difference, but not an audible one. You simply cannot hear the suppressed THD and SNR. It does not matter. Maybe THX might have been relevant 20 years ago, but modern amps are as perceptibly silent as THX amps. The vaunted THX technology is meaningless. It was hyperbolic nonsense when it was being pushed several years ago, and it remains the marketing boogeyman for unsuspecting audiophiles. I'm going to break the value and conclusion section into 2 parts. Here's part 1. The bottom line. No, the K9 is not value. This device offers nothing new and sounds identical to far cheaper alternatives. But it is well built and powerful. It is clearly a luxury product. If you want to buy it so that you can thump your chest on forums and feel like you have the latest technology, then the K9 is a perfectly good device. Go ahead and buy it for those reasons. Now, if you're sensitive about products and companies being taken to task, you should stop here. If you do not take offense to critical assessment of products and manufacturers, then the second part of this conclusion might be worth listening to. I've already said that the K9 is not value, but it's still a good device because it does not exhibit any odd behavior, faults, or inconsistencies in how it performs. It's a transparent, distortion-free amp DAC. I suppose that is the lowest threshold for any modern audiophile device. But I have to question Fiio's logic. What exactly were they aiming for? The K9 does nothing better than the $350 EX5. Both of these devices offer similar audio resolutions, Bluetooth, MQA, both are powerful and can drive any headphone, and both have identical sound. The EX5 does not have THX or dual femtosecond clocks, but neither of those things makes a lick of difference anyway. What exactly is Fiio offering in the K9 that justifies the price gap between a device like the EX5? We're talking about a price difference of $500, roughly double the price of the EX5, but you're not getting double the performance, double the usable features, or double the euphoric sound. But while we're at it, let's also compare the K9 to slightly more expensive competitors. Let's take a look at the Mini-i Pro 3. That device seems to fluctuate a little bit in price, but currently is marked at $1,025. The difference of $175, that is, the difference in price between the K9 and Mini-i, does provide you more from the Mini-i Pro 3. You see, you also get streaming support for Apple AirPlay and Roon, and that's on top of all the audio formats that the Mini-i provides. Or take a look at the RME ADI2 DAC, which is presently on sale for $1,000. The RME is one of my favorite devices because it offers features that no other DAC amp has. It's a full-fledged powerhouse product for those who like to monitor and fiddle with their audio. While the RME does not have MQA or some fancy tech that the K9 does, it simply outclasses the K9 with a feature set that is indeed meaningful. This puts the K9 in a precarious situation. Competing against far cheaper products, it offers nothing new. Competing against slightly more expensive products, it doesn't offer what they do. Oh, and sonically, the K9 Pro is no different from the K5 Pro, a product that it supposedly replaces. How can Fiio possibly think this is a good position for their flagship product? And who is the K9 for? If you want the newest toy in the market, you can go ahead and buy it. But there is nothing remotely logical about the K9's price point, particularly in light of all the competition. If the K9 was $500, I would still say it is too expensive, but that would have been far easier to accept than the current price tag. Maybe you have noticed the audiophile community waxing poetic every time a new DAC or amp hits the market. Why is it that the newest DAC is more dynamic than the one from 6 months ago? Why do reviewers claim that an amp which is marketed as transparent has a warm sound signature? The fundamental problem, as I see it, is people refusing to do true A/B comparisons and using critical analysis. And, of course, some people are proud hype men whose only job is to sell products, and you can see that clearly from their list of videos. Frankly, I am tired of companies producing rinse and repeat DACs and amps, shoehorning the latest gen DAC chip, making minor alterations on the boards, and updating the enclosure. All of that is indicative of a lack of imagination. These products do not sound different. The dynamics argument is patently ridiculous, and you can see how silly such commentary is if you do a modicum of research about dynamic range. Think about DACs and amps rationally. For the sake of argument, let's assume these products have some audible difference. Whatever differences you think exist, they're nowhere close to the variety of sound signatures offered from headphones and IEMs. So, while you might be hoping to hear more dynamics from your DAC or amp, you actually will hear obvious differences by switching to another headphone or IEM. And those who are inclined towards listening to music as the artist intended should simply purchase a transparent DAC and amp at the lowest price. Since you are not sitting in the mixing booth, do not have the $1,000 monitors the artists were using, do not have identical room treatment or a mixing console sitting in front of you, you absolutely will not hear music as the artist intended. You have no clue what the artist intended, other than to make music they hope you like and buy. Even Neil Young doesn't care what headphones, amps, or DACs you use to listen to his music. He just doesn't want Tidal altering his master files, a feeling I completely agree with. The bottom line about modern DACs and amps is that they are equally good. Finding one with audible differences is a rare event. And when these products give exactly the same audio resolutions, connectivity, and similar power output, why the hell would you pay double or triple or quadruple the price for one over the other? Features. That's why. I'm talking about real, usable features, not the imaginary THX, THD, SNR, femtosecond, atomic level, indiscernible bull that some audiophiles and many companies tend to peddle. Look at these things objectively and with a clear mind. The only reason you should spend money on a DAC amp around $1,000 is if it provides features you are going to use and those features are not replicated at a lower price point. The Mini-i Pro 3 and RME 80i2 are the poster children for this argument. Look, I think Fiio could and should have done more, and far better, with the K9. They should have implemented DSP functionality or some form of EQ adjustability, or the ability to read from SD cards and SSDs, or supplemented the K9 with a desktop app similar to what Sound Blaster has provided for years. It just amazes me that Fiio, SMSL, Topping, and frankly all other manufacturers keep repeating what they have already done. Over and over again, year after year, is the same thing, just a different label. People are wasting money on these types of products. The manufacturers shove pricey components into the enclosure, but those components do not make any audible difference, have no effect on the presentation. They are excuses to artificially inflate the price tag and to give the false impression that high-tech means best. Ultimately, the K9 Pro is an expensive DAC amp that offers nothing materially new in the market. It is astoundingly overpriced, sounds identical to competitors, has power output comparable to cheaper options, and is merely the latest product to receive glowing praise for doing what has already been done many times before. It's the same pig wearing slightly different shades of lipstick.